All right, so this is a bit of a ramble, but I wanted to talk about a way to subtly gain distance on your opponent, and therefore, make sure that they are in your place and you're still not in theirs. So yeah, one of the most useful concepts George Silver gives us is the concept of place, right? Which the way I interpret it basically is your opponent is in your place if you can strike them without moving, and you are in your opponent's place if they can strike you without moving. So if you are in your opponent's place, that's about the most dangerous place you could be, and if they are in yours, that's the most advantageous to you. So the goal, the way I see it, of George Silver's fight is to manipulate distance and manipulate the fight such that you have the highest likelihood of your opponent being in your place and they have the lowest likelihood of you being in theirs, right? So basically the fight ends up being at a pretty big distance, right? You fight at the maximum range of engagement, kind of out here, such that your opponent has to step to reach you, and when they do so, you slip and countercut as they enter your place and you leave theirs, right? That's all good. I love that. That's how I like to fight. But sometimes it can be a little on the nose, right? If your opponent sees that you're just maintaining distance, they might stop trying to attack you, which George Silver would see as a good thing, right? Self-defense done if your opponent stops trying to go at you. And you might have to get more clever and find ways to bait them out, right? One way to do that is to be really subtle about the way that you gain the place on them, right? So there are ways you can do that by, doing gather steps, right? Bringing your foot in, so you start gaining that distance, that effective distance. You're still taking a step there, but it's at least a safer way to do it. Another way is with an offhand tool. So obviously, offhand tools like a buckler let us do a lot of stuff. They let us turn what would be otherwise suicidal attacks into plausible, if not outright preferable options, right? So if we're at distance and I were to do, say, a lunge cut for my wife's leg, that would be a pretty suicidal option, right? But if I have a buckler, I can turn what's a suicidal option into pretty reasonable, if not outright good, right? Again, it's still a bit on the nose though. So one way in which we can subtly gain distance is by playing with elevation. And I don't think a lot of people think about this, and at the very least, don't utilize it as much as maybe they should. So if we range up and we're both, say, out of measure with each other right now, right? Neither of us can hit each other as much as we want, right? So right now, particularly that leg shot is what I want to show you today. I can cut as much as I want at Danielle's leg, and I can't hit it, right? But if I lower myself down a bit, I can now strike her leg without stepping, right? So right now, we are out of place, both of us, without moving at all. I am now in place. I can strike her, and she is still out of place, right? So in a fight, what that might end up looking like is gaining distance and then lowering, right? So you can throw that shot directly, therefore the fastest, or if you do need to, you can take a small step, but much smaller than you'd have to take before, right? So when I throw that cut, I like to throw it at the knee or just above it, because that's, there's a cat crawling down the ceiling, the roof. I like to throw it at the knee or just above that, because that's the last thing to withdraw when you slip your leg, right? So if I cut, I like to cut right there, because as she moves her leg back, that's the last thing to go backwards, usually. Sometimes you have someone who slips in a weird way, but I found that to be generally true, right? So as for defending that leg, a slip, if I have a buckler in this case, a slip should still be your primary way of defending, but as an extra act of surety, or if you're really going to insist on parrying, playing with that elevation game is still useful, right? So I like to make sure whenever I'm set up with a sword and buckler that I can reach the bottom of my knee wherever I am. So as I'm moving in the measure, I'll make sure so that I can still tag the front of my lead knee, right? That gives me that extra depth of protection. So if she is maybe not being super quick about it, I can just stand my ground and parry. So if you go ahead and cut for my leg, I can just parry it outright and don't have to give any ground. But even if I do slip it, which I probably should, I am now extra safe if it comes around and catches me in the leg, if she lunged forward. So yeah, just think about ways to play with elevation of your body relative to your opponent as a way to help you gain measure on them. And for me, that's something, it's gone from being a trick to being an outright technique because it's so reliable. And that's kind of a cornerstone of the way I fight with sword and buckler or sword and dagger, whatever the offhand tool is. And you could make a strong argument that as long as you can maintain that position, being basically as low as possible to a degree is always going to be more advantageous. You compress your body down behind the defense, it gets easier to cover yourself, and your offensive potential goes up as you are as your relative range to your opponent increases, particularly to their lower half. So that's kind of my rambling explanation of a technique that I find really rewarding. All right, cheers.